Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be getting started shortly once everyone has made it into the webinar here from the waiting room. Just going to give it another minute. All right, well, let's get started. My name is Stephen Barnes. I'm the Executive Director of the Kathleen Babineau Blanco Public Policy Center at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and we are so glad that you are all able to join us this afternoon. We're excited to welcome you to our fourth Lunch and Learn for Whole Health Louisiana. Whole Health Louisiana is a collaborative effort led by the Louisiana Department of Health as the public sector anchor and funder for the Whole Health Louisiana initiative. And the Blanco Center leads the plan's implementation and evaluation. If you're unfamiliar with what Whole Health Louisiana is, it's the state's cross-sector initiative intended to systematically address, mitigate, and prevent childhood adversity within our systems of care and support. Whole Health Louisiana has 4 priority areas and goals: collaboration, awareness, workforce, and prevention and healing. With these priorities in mind, Whole Health Louisiana's vision is to build a state where children, families, and community members across Louisiana are healthy and thriving, regardless of who they are or where they live. I'm going to turn it over now to Quinn from the Blanco Center, who will be moderating today's session and introduce our speaker.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. So, hi, everyone. If you are not new here, you probably see my face and know who I am. But for those who are new today, I'm Quinn, a research associate here at the Blanco Center at UL Lafayette and the coordinator for the Whole Health Louisiana project. I will be moderating this webinar and all of the Lunch and Learn webinars to come along with my colleagues here at the Blanco Center. So as a part of this Whole Health Louisiana initiative, we are holding a variety of different activities meant to raise awareness and deepen conversation about trauma-informed care practices. Our virtual Lunch and Learn series touches on the workforce priority area of the Whole Health Louisiana plan and features presentations from industry professionals and subject matter experts. We have a webinar planned for one Thursday of each month through June, and each webinar will touch on various topics related to the goals and objectives of Whole Health Louisiana. Our planned webinars are listed on our Eventbrite page that you all use to register for today's event. And in addition to the webinar series, Whole Health Louisiana is conducting in-person regional trauma-informed care training sessions across the state of Louisiana, with our next one being in Hammond. If you're interested in attending our next regional training, check out the links that will be dropped by my colleagues in the chat. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to mention that our ASL interpreter for today is led by Lisa Gill. You should see them pinned to your screen to view the interpretation throughout the webinar. I'm now going to introduce our speaker for today, Jessie Kohler, who is the Executive Director on Loan for the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, also known as CTIPP. Kohler leads efforts to apply the science of the developmental adversity to foster community resilience and support organizations focused on holistic well-being. Jesse spent the first part of his career working for nonprofits serving Philadelphia communities and at the state level for the Office of Attorney General and the Governor's Campaign. He obtained his bachelor's in law and society from Oberlin College, and while earning his master's in educational leadership, he took on the role of CTIPP's first intern. Later, he served as a board member for several years before becoming its first executive director. He also founded the Change Campaign, a nonprofit organization that is working to promote accessibility, belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and liberty for all. At the Change Campaign, Kohler manages administration and fosters a safe, empowering environment for the board, staff, and volunteers in his current capacity at CTIPP. So that's just a little information about our great speaker here, who will be presenting shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him to present.
Thanks so much, Quinn. You able to see the slides all right? and assume that the answer is yes. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Quinn said, my name is Jesse Kohler, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the executive director of CTIPP. Today, I'm going to discuss trauma-informed workplaces, and then we'll spotlight a bit about our organization's work to build population-level resilience in communities to the impacts of extreme weather events and other climate-related disasters. But first, to set the stage, I will start with an overview of the importance of taking a systems-level approach to addressing trauma and in addition to healing trauma or addressing trauma at a systems level, in addition to healing trauma at an individual level. At the root of so many issues that our society is grappling with, we find trauma. When there is a root cause of a linked set of public health outcomes, it's called a syndemic. So frequently, we deal with each of these issues by themselves, and this work is critical to address the stress our society faces from each of these issue areas, but we must also work to address the root cause in order to truly transform our society toward one that does not perpetuate such horrible outcomes in the first place, which is why a trauma-informed approach is necessary. When we talk about trauma, the focus is so often, if not exclusively at times, on the individual. Too frequently, we put the onus and burden of well-being on individuals alone and fail to recognize how traumatized systems, which perpetuate stress and adversity, disproportionately on marginalized people and groups of people, then promote the negative outcomes at the individual level that we are working to address. Policy and other systemic levers have the power to create conditions that allow for people to thrive. But of course, we know that far too frequently the opposite is done, and policies create conditions that lead to harm and perpetuate trauma. But this is why we do the work that we do, so that all individuals, families, and communities have the opportunities and supports necessary to thrive. To create conditions that ensure that we are making lives better across the social ecological framework, as we saw on the last slide, we need to take a public health approach. Our systems currently promote a treatment-first mentality. While we must pay mind to treating the needs that exist today, we must also work to intervene as early as possible and most powerfully prevent as much harm as possible in the first place. If we do not have a proactive approach that matches our reactive efforts, we will ensure that more of the same problems we face today continue into the future. We cannot just treat our ways out of the problems that we are facing as a society. We must work to address the root cause drivers and work upstream to prevent as much as possible. While a lot of times it is difficult to imagine or measure what we keep from happening, it is not impossible, and we have seen many examples of community being the medicine that we need, perhaps none more powerfully measured, at least, than what has become known as self-healing communities, which is a report published by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I will post the link to the chat or in the chat at the end of my presentation to the report, that highlights the work of the Washington State Family Policy Council from 1994 to 2011. They trained more than several dozen communities in a combination of trauma-informed approaches and systems thinking, as well as sustained investment in said communities to allow the work to continue, which set into motion a set of positive outcomes across the communities they worked with. The work looked different across communities, and they were focused on addressing the root causes of several problems, not just putting the money directly into the symptoms of the problem, but instead working to find systemic solutions to what was driving the problems in the first place. Across the communities that they worked with, as you can see on the charts on the right of the slide, they outperformed the communities that opted out of working with the Family Policy Council widely. In one county, they reduced youth suicide and suicide attempts by 98%, while simultaneously decreasing juvenile justice system involvement, birth to teen parents, and high school dropout rates, each by around 50%. By centering community decision-making and building what they called general community capacity, they created tremendous outcomes across the communities that they worked with and therefore widely throughout the state. And in addition to and because of the remarkable outcomes discussed on the prior slide and many more that were accomplished, they generated more than $1 billion in cost avoidance over the lifespan of their work. You can see on the screen how this cost avoidance was measured. What we know is that if the work had continued beyond just the 17 years that the Family Policy Council had to drive this project, which was predominantly focused on a 12-year period following the publishing of the ACEs study in 1998, though we cannot ignore the readiness and relationships that were developed in the first 5 or so years of their work and how that then enhanced the work of the last dozen years, there was a measured cost avoidance that equaled a greater than 35x return on investment. This work is important on a number of levels, and the fact that it cannot just economically sustain itself, but also scale over time and work to create opportunities for investment in other important areas is incredibly important. We know that if this work had continued longer, the return on investment would have been exponentially higher. At the 20, 25, 30-year marks, when children who were born into this work started to have children of their own, we would anticipate a reduction in the transmission of intergenerational trauma, which would have transformative effects, and that would be true for many generations into the future. It creates a transformative vision for where this work can lead. So how do we start with this work in different communities and within systems? First, we want to think about how we operationalize these 6 principles from SAMHSA's framework when we are doing this work. The 4 R's: to realize the widespread impact of trauma, recognizing trauma signs and symptoms, responding to trauma effectively, and resisting traumatization and re-traumatization can also be a helpful compass. There are many. But being trauma-informed is not just about labeling ourselves as such. It is a commitment to an ongoing process of learning and growth that is based in these principles and other principles that are important to the communities or systems that we are working with and within. How do we promote safety, which includes physical safety as well as psychological, social, and moral safety? Are we being transparent and earning others' trust, or do we simply demand it due to power imbalances? Are we creating conditions of empowerment, voice, and choice so that folks are genuinely able to engage and contribute in meaningful ways to the best of our ability? Is true collaboration occurring, and do people feel valued? In what ways are we perpetuating oppressive cultures and marginalizing any person or group of people, whether intentionally or unintentionally? And are we building a culture in which we are provided with skills to support ourselves? And are we building community so that peers feel as though they are equipped and able to support others as well? We will never be perfect in doing all of this, but I believe that being trauma-informed is in the pursuit of living into these qualities more than it is boasting that we have achieved them. In addition to using a trauma-informed approach, it is important to address community-level and organization-wide change through systems thinking. Frequently, we try to address problems with linear thinking, believing that if we do X, then Y outcome will occur. Humans and communities are not so simple. While this thinking may be good for simple processes, when doing community work, we are dealing with complex systems. That does not mean that every solution itself needs to be complicated. However, even simple solutions must be developed within an understanding of the complex ecosystems that they are being embedded in if they are going to be successful long term. The map on this slide, which I know is blurry and not that easily readable, is a systems map done by the Rural Opportunity Institute and their community to address ACEs and trauma, which I will also put the link to the report that is published in the chat at the end of this presentation. You will see that systems are impacted by forces that heal, unexamined beliefs, unexamined responses, indicators of health, and various biases that interplay a complex dynamic that drive the cycles of trauma as well as healing. When we pull together systems thinking and trauma-informed principles discussed on the last slide at a minimum, in addition to other important processes highlighted by the community, we create a powerful foundation from which to move forward. I won't go into it today for time's sake, but just so you know, CTIPP has a toolkit that takes an in-depth look at what helps and hinders the development of trauma-informed community change. We know that trauma-informed work in communities will look different across communities based on the population's needs, resources, and desires of each community. You'll hear me say that a lot today. So this guide to community change does not prescribe action, but pulls out promising and emerging practices and otherwise synthesizes existing research to support considerations and wonderments for communities to take. Again, I won't dive too deeply into this today, but we'll share a QR code to dive into this further later in the call if you're interested. And we'll share more about our work supporting transformational resilience coordinating networks, which is what we call communities working to build population level resilience to the impacts of extreme weather events and other climate-related disasters. But before we talk about that, let's dive into trauma-informed workplaces. Of course, workplaces are a critical piece of any community. As we dive into the principles of trauma-informed workplaces, know that this toolkit was designed to support advocates in taking steps to help any organization and the individuals who make them up to understand the importance of this paradigm shift and changing our ways of being, thinking, doing, knowing, and relating. This was not designed to be an implementation guide, though there are helpful considerations and examples throughout it. This is a place to get the work started and deepen understanding, but this work requires an ongoing commitment. Foundationally, in a world where most people have been exposed to trauma in some way, shape, or form, trauma-informed environments should be the norm. At this point, we know what helps, how to promote vicarious post-traumatic growth, compassion, satisfaction, moral resiliency, moral courage, and more, as well as what hurts, how burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and more are perpetuated. And that is what you will find in this toolkit. A both and approach highlighting what individuals can do and also what our organizations can and should do to promote well-being in and beyond the workplace. We know that there needs to be a shared commitment. A trauma-informed workplace cannot rely on just some people doing the work, but rather a shared commitment, while recognizing that different folks in different departments across the organization may have different roles. While individuals can advocate for trauma-informed workplaces, truly trauma-informed workplaces rely on more than just an individual or group of people to achieve. There needs to be buy-in from everyone. We've discussed living systems in this presentation already, but recognizing that workplaces evolve and are living beings themselves, experience their own traumas, and that healing takes place over time is critical as this work emerges and sustains culture shifts within organizations. We need a paradigm shift to understand that promoting well-being of workers is the priority. And evidence suggests that when this becomes the priority, bottom line figures and productivity go up. But that does not mean that productivity and financial performance then become the priority again. These are always going to be important for businesses, but our people must always come first. We are more than just our work product. We need sleep, we need play, and we need to address these lapses that exist as we create a stronger economy and workforce. And I know I said this before, but just to reiterate it, we cannot put the onus of well-being on individuals alone. Our systems and workplaces must take ownership of the way that they perpetuate harm and the impacts that has at the micro, meso, and macro levels. Our work environments play a crucial role in shaping our well-being, which makes sense as most adults spend substantial time in the workplace. What happens in the workplace impacts other domains of our lives as well, and vice versa, which is why we think about solutions in holistic and systematic ways. Particularly since the coronavirus pandemic, according to the LIRA State of Work report, which I will also put in the chat later, there has been a substantial increase in the number of U.S. workers who report that their mental health impacts their ability to do their jobs, and the report names trauma responses as creating cascading challenges that impact the workplace. More and more workers are looking for workplaces that promote well-being and will look after them. And workplaces that offer such benefits also show increased satisfaction and connection in the workplace. The time to create trauma-informed workplaces has been present for a long time, probably forever. Yet the continued and in many cases growing need to address the traumas we have experienced and continue to experience as a society creates ripe opportunity for the continued push for greater trauma-informed workplaces now. As CTIPP's former board chair, I need to update this slide, and founder Sandy Bloom says, trauma-informed workplaces offer a sanctuary of safety and support a place where people can bring their whole selves and be valued for who they are. Sandy is well known as one of the foremothers and pioneers of the trauma-informed movement. Beyond just needing to support the individuals in the workplace, these supports help the workplace and economy at large as well. I wish that we lived in a society where we made decisions because it was what was best for people, and I maintain hope that we can create such a society someday. However, in our capitalist systems, the economic arguments are often necessary to support change, and data and current trends also support the need for this work along these realms. We are talking about lost productivity and additional costs in the trillions of dollars every single year as a result of unmet needs around chronic stress and overwhelming adversity. Building buffers and supports through trauma-informed approaches will help people and will also help businesses and our economy at large. So as we look toward trauma-informed workplaces, we need to understand how trauma shows up so that we can recognize trauma, realize its impacts, respond effectively, and resist traumatization and re-traumatization. Trauma is not just an event, but is the interpretation of an event, which is up to various individual and environmental factors. While some events are widely traumatic, the perception of how an event impacts different people differently makes the concept of trauma nearly infinitely complex. We cannot know every trauma that someone has experienced, which is why creating conditions of safety and empowerment is so important. Some people may become more aggressive when they experience trauma, while others may become more dissociative, while others may bounce between these two extremes. Some folks may not even be aware that these changes are taking place. Regardless of individual adaptation, without support to promote healing, trauma can have lifelong impacts to the body, mind, personality, and our relationships. We know that with support and time, post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic wisdom provide immense hope for the future despite the great challenges that we face during our lives. We must also recognize that compounding losses and tragedies reduce our capacities to cope. This is why prevention, as we have discussed already throughout this presentation, and building structures that promote connections, as relationships are the greatest buffers to stress that we have as humans, are incredibly important in this work. These factors manifest across the workspace in a variety of ways that are harmful to workplace cultures, as you can see on this slide. We know that these are just some of the ways that trauma can manifest. And beyond just awareness, being trauma-informed comes down to meaningful integration into changing our ways of thinking, being, doing, knowing, and relating with others. Let's take a look at how we can examine and consider ways that policies and practices can support trauma-informed workplaces, which is a critical part of the discussion, as policies and practices have the power to institutionalize trauma-informed principles throughout a system. Please know, while we will stay relatively high level with this presentation, there is more for those who are interested in the toolkit itself. As we have discussed already in this presentation, being trauma-informed is about committing to an ongoing process of learning and growth. There are many ways, such as systematized evaluation and reflection of employees and programs, that a commitment to an ongoing process can be systematized. Garnering and increasing buy-in from everyone throughout an organization is important, and when leadership gets invested, change can sometimes be accelerated, especially when they are a good partner with others instead of partnering down to others. The returns on this work take time, so we must remain patient and diligent in this work as we turn the tide within workplace cultures toward well-being. And a great way to do this is to celebrate and build upon all wins along the way for individual employees and customers, as well as for the workplace and the organization as a whole. On this slide are examples of strategies that can work to promote trauma-informed workplaces. There are links and examples of these in practice in the toolkit as you read through it that venture deeper and further. We want to create conditions in which people feel proud of their work and allow us to truly flourish. These strategies help us to secure trauma-informed principles into the policies that help govern the workplace, as well as support them showing up in the dailiness of their work and interactions within the workplace. This big change takes time, and all of these changes cannot and will not happen overnight. Going back to some of the lessons learned in the Guide to Community Change, such as having a process orientation, celebrating small wins, like I mentioned on the last slide, are critical to sustaining organizational culture change. But we do know that as the process sustains itself and scales for longer, continuing the effort to do so becomes more exciting, and that seeing these changes benefit the work product and culture make it easier to continue the commitment. At CTIPP, we work to model the model in our own work. We're not perfect, and there is a lot of room to grow, but this has been something we've been committed to from the beginning. Understanding our own organizational trauma, a part of which is that we were unfunded for the first more than 5 years of our history. So while there was never a doubt about the direction and importance of our mission, the way that we were organized was primarily through a volunteer board, which led to a lack of coordination as people did the best they could on discrete tasks. When we started to get funded and staffing after the onset of COVID, this led to new opportunities as well as new problems, which we have continued to work through, and I am proud of the progress we have made, but just want to emphasize that this work takes time. Thinking about the point on the last slide about being patient and intentional. Work is being done at multiple levels to ensure that we are continuously working toward becoming trauma-informed and documenting our journey to support others from what we learn works and doesn't work. As a board, we have dealt with obvious and yet still very difficult to answer questions, like what does a trauma-informed organization and board look like? The authority that is held in the hands of those not doing the work every day is inherently not a trauma-informed structure. This has been particularly difficult as board roles have changed as the organization has grown, going from needing to focus on creating white papers to needing to focus on fiduciary duties that a governing board must manage. There is still a long way to go in all of this. We have tried to model transparency and choice by communicating these changes explicitly and supporting board members who have not wanted to continue in the position as the roles have changed. We continue to work on this and have good goals set for the year ahead. As a staff, we have worked hard to incorporate practices that allow us to navigate the stresses of this work. In addition to team meetings and one-on-ones, we have regularly scheduled process calls where we just have time to talk about how we are doing, both personally and professionally, and support each other on a human level rather than just focusing on work. We have invested resources, the most valuable of which is our time, on training and coaching that have helped us with conflict resolution and creating healthy team processes. For example, we have stopped setting arbitrary deadlines. Obviously, there are times that deadlines are very real, and other times we create self-imposed deadlines that lead to increased stress. By creating a culture that as an underfunded organization where most of our team, including myself, is part-time, we have established a culture where we trust that each other is working as hard as possible to get our work done. I can honestly say that doing so has not seen a slowdown in our work product, but has reduced unnecessary and unproductive stress. As a leader myself, I have worked on what decentralized leadership looks like and working to establish democratic processes for staff to generate work that they see as necessary from their perspectives, while trying to balance that with the competing business demands around fundraising, ensuring follow through on the work that has already been started, and more. It is difficult to balance the business needs and the people needs, but that is the responsibility of an organizational leader. Whether meeting with a board member, an employee, a volunteer, a funder, someone on one of our calls, or all of you, or anyone else, I work hard to show up as fully as possible to support them while maintaining the barriers I must for our organization. This is not because of my title, as I believe that leadership can exist anywhere within an organization, but requires work and diligence to be able to show up in empathic ways that hold healthy boundaries for myself and the organization. I have continuously learned from what is and is not working to inform the strategic vision for our work and do my best to leave my ego aside and put the mission we are working toward and my team's well-being as paramount focus in my work. As an organization, we grapple with how to build and lead the movement in trauma-informed ways. As the main advocacy organization promoting trauma-informed policies and practices widely in Congress, at least at the federal level, It has been a journey navigating how we ensure that we are not just authoritatively telling people what must be important to them or how they should do the work. As I have said on this call, this work will look different in different contexts, though we must still also protect against trauma-informed just becoming a buzzword. We have kept all of our resources free of charge as we feel this is in line with our model. We have partnered with coalitions that lead on particular policies with more capacity than we have alone as an organization. We have worked to create materials to support advocates to understand how they can advocate for their own policy and practice ideas while maintaining focus on the policies that we can monitor and lead on, which are federal bills supporting cross-sector trauma-informed coalition, as well as some agency-level work. We have built a vision that as CTIPP grows, after we have sufficient capacity to maintain our own operations, we hope to be able to begin funding community and state coalitions to support their work and learn from their successes more than we are able to today. It's a journey, and I just share a bit about our journey to hopefully enliven how organizations can implement the strategies that you see outlined on this slide and more. Look, this work is hard, and the starting point for different organizations will be different. But we engage in similar processes no matter where we start when we really commit to this work. Asking hard questions and being open to critical feedback is necessary as we grow. Developing a shared language and discussing shared values early and often helps to reduce how our own experiences of trauma get brought up in this process. Updating as new team members join and the organization changes is necessary to sustain these initiatives over time. Leadership giving up some power and the team as a whole increasing accountability can be hard. But in my own experience and what we have seen from others, it is very well worth it. While that was a long slide discussing trauma at a systemic level, and we know that the onus can not only be on individuals. Of course, this is a both-and situation, and there are still individual strategies that we can take to be more trauma-informed. This slide shows individual strategies which can work to make a difference and progress toward creating trauma-informed workplaces. Being advocates for trauma-informed policies and practices and modeling the model ourselves is very important, as are opportunities to create space for community building, setting healthy boundaries for ourselves, and analyzing organizational policies and practices. These are important steps as well that each of us can take as agents of change within our own organizations. I will not go into as much detail as I did on the last slide for time's sake, but will quickly share that areas of growth in this realm that I have reflected and built upon include taking care of myself to ensure that I can more fully show up for others in the organization, which has been important because in work that is fundamentally about promoting well-being, we must ensure that we are working toward wellness ourselves. Working to recognize the ways that my whiteness and masculinity show up in the places that I am in, while also balancing that with being my full authentic self, and working to hold boundaries for myself and the organization so that we are doing what we can to support others while ensuring that we are not so overstretched that we are unable to thrive. These again are high level, and there are many more, which again, you can find examples and strategies of in the toolkit itself. This slide has the guide to CTIPP's Community Change Guide and the Workplace Toolkit. If the QR codes and the links on the slide don't work for any reason, you can find these and other resources for free on our website, and I will also post these in the chat after the call, or after I'm done speaking at least, along with our TRCN work, which I will move on to now. I want to start by acknowledging that I know that so many folks are tired of hearing the word resilience. You will hear me use the term transformational resilience to describe not just bouncing back from disasters and being ready to withstand the next one, but simultaneously promoting individual wellness through adversities while changing systems to reduce the hardships that we face. As I have said multiple times on this call already, we must have a systems level and trauma-informed approach to create the holistic solutions that we require. On this slide is an example of what a transformational resilience coordinating network can look like. It is really well-coordinated decentralization. We know that decentralizing power and democratic principles are important in trauma-informed approaches, and using a ring team or a hub and spoke approach can help operationalize this. These are just examples. Each network is different. As discussed earlier in this call, each community has different populations, needs, resources, and desires. So each community's TRCN will look different. They might elect co-chairs in an executive committee. Some may have funding to hire staff from the beginning. But outside of that, innovation teams that are working with different populations, which you can see on the outside, will form. They're doing their own work. They're developing their own strategies to build transformational resilience and mental wellness within the populations that they work with. But they come back together and they stay coordinated with this broader group. They share their strategies. They get feedback on it. There are many examples of the importance of this. This kind of approach can also be really helpful to coordinate fundraising efforts. So we've got to collaborate in new and expanded ways to respond to the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe that we face. And the ring team approach, the well-coordinated decentralization that you could call the TRCN, is one of the key ways that this can be done. Now, this takes time to develop. And in the work we do with communities, we start with leaders to form steering committees and then missions and visions that then lead to increased network buy-in and strategic plans that develop within TRCNs and then drive the TRCNs themselves. Our work with communities is available for free, and you can learn more on our website. And again, I will post the specific link in the chat later. This work is critical. As we will get into on this slide, we are expanding the community cohesion phase and reducing the disillusionment phase that are common in disasters. And these that you see on the screen right now are the 6 phases of disasters in climate ecology. Sometimes there is a warning, but we will start with the impact from an event or series of events. And if great enough, this can impact up to 20 to 40% of the people that are directly impacted and 10 to 20% of others, emergency responders, people who know somebody who's impacted, etc. And then we begin to enter into a heroic phase. The impacts are happening and people who don't know others step forward and put their lives on the line for them to help each other during and right after an event occurs. Then it usually goes into the community cohesion phase, which can also be called the honeymoon phase, where community members come together. By having a TRCN in place before a disaster, connections exists and skills are built to enhance the heroic phase. The community capacity exists to maximize the community cohesion phase, as we see that often the response requires neighbors helping neighbors. They provide food, shelter, water, social supports, emotional supports, and the like. As much as, if not more than, emergency responders, it is the community that supports itself in rebuilding following a disastrous event. That really is vital, and you see that often. But then a lot of times the community cohesion phase ends after some period of time. Could be a month, it could be a year, it could be a few days, because people go back and organize their own lives. So that ends, and that's when the disillusionment phase can take over, and that can last months to years. And that's where most of the mental health problems emerge because people are left on their own. Some people may stay dysregulated for a long time, but most eventually start to recover, assuming there's no other disaster or relentless stress that they experience. The ongoing nature of the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is going to make that more and more difficult. So why do we need transformational resilience coordinating networks? Because as you all on this call know all too well, and I apologize in advance for the bluntness of this statement, but we know that the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is going to continue and likely accelerate, at least in the near future. Most mental health problems surface months or later after those direct impacts occur in that disillusionment phase. So we need to build the horizontal social infrastructure within neighborhoods and communities to sustain the community cohesion phase over the long term. That's what we're really trying to do, not to let so that people don't have to go out on their own and experience those issues alone, but that we do this together. We want to emphasize that there cannot be true community resilience without a focus on human, social, psychological, and emotional resilience. We can't just focus on external physical resilience. Actions to reduce emissions, regenerate and restore ecosystems, strengthen physical resilience are going to have limited effects unless they are fully integrated into efforts to build population-level mental wellness and transformational resilience. At the same time, disaster preparedness and response and disaster mental health and other human services are going to be much more effective when they are integrated into these community-led resilience building initiatives. Years-long research with communities around the world by the International Transformational Resilience Coalition has found the 5 key areas that are going to be specifically needed for the climate emergency, and by far, the most important is to build strong and weak social connections throughout the community. By strong, I mean people who you know, friends, families, neighbors who you share your life with. By weak, it means people who you don't necessarily share personal things with, but you're still connected to in some way. And you can also call it bonding, bridging, and linking social support networks. The second core foundational area is to ensure a just transition by actively engaging residents and creating zero-emission, climate-resilient, physical-built, economic, and ecological conditions. Locally owned and operated businesses, healthy and safe public spaces, parks, equitable transportation, healthy forest and ecological systems, healthy and ample housing, etc. is critical. We don't usually think of this as our job in the mental health and human service world, but it is. We need to avoid that siloing and come up with comprehensive strategies that we are all engaged in. The third foundational area is to really build universal literacy about mental health and well-being. This feeds off of health literacy, and what the research shows that people are very health literate. Literacy around mental wellness is very low. But we want to build that by helping everyone become trauma informed, helping everyone understand how trauma and toxic stress affects their body, mind, emotions, and behaviors, and then learn presencing and purposing skills, which are self-regulation and adversity-based growth skills. The fourth area is to help residents regularly engage in specific practices that enhance mental wellness and transformational resilience, which I know can be difficult during very stressful times, but are important to do, and as often as we are able to. These ongoing opportunities for healing are critical. A recent example of communities building around this is after last year's wildfires in Hawaii, a part of the state's response was to give out ukuleles and support people connecting through music, which is an important cultural practice for many Hawaiians. These opportunities may be different for different people and groups of people, but their availability is important. And finally, the fifth area is to establish mostly peer-led group and community-minded opportunities to heal trauma. Even when people are engaged in these other activities, many times because of the climate emergency getting worse, they will experience trauma, and peer support is a critical infrastructure to promote and support well-being. Clinical therapy is important, but can also be expensive, and there are rarely enough therapists to meet the demands within a population. We cannot treat our ways out of the problems that we are facing and must look beyond only clinical treatment options as we work to develop public health approaches to building community capacity to withstand and grow through the crises that we face. The one other thing that I will say is that these 5 foundational areas are interactive. It's not linear, but these are happening as time moves forward together. What we must recognize is that so many of the deepest problems we face in this world, we must get through together. We need each other to heal. It is through community, which can be defined in a variety of ways, from geographic to identity-based or otherwise, that we will find our ways out of the issues that our society is facing. The principles shared today and hopefully helpful in some ways as you all move forward to build community and workplace capacity to promote healing and transformational resilience. I know that it is not easy. As was said when I was being introduced, the work that I do today is informed by the work that I did in Philadelphia communities at the beginning of my career, as well as the many lessons, often painful, as I have worked to support CTIPP's growth. And if not more importantly than just CTIPP's growth, the growth of the trauma-informed movement all around the country. It's easy to present, but what I shared today is in no way meant to portray this work as simple. These interconnected steps are never truly over. We are just constantly working toward better and learning along the way. but I do believe that it is some of the most critical and rewarding work possible, which is why I have devoted so much of my career to it. And I know that you all and many other thousands of communities and workplaces that do work along these lines feel similarly. While some of the information shared during this call is a bit depressing, I have tremendous hope that we can and will get through the wicked problems that we face and create a sustainable planet and a better future for all. But the only way that we are going to do that is by doing it together. I thank you all for the opportunity to be here with you and for your attention throughout my time. I have had the privilege of getting to watch Whole Health Louisiana develop from afar over the past few years, and it is truly an honor to be here with you all today. I thank you for what you do, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'll take down my slides now and share the links that I promised throughout the presentation. And Lissa, just to mention, I mean, my goodness, I put you through the ringer on that one, so appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Jesse, for your amazing presentation. We're gonna go ahead and start fielding some questions. Feel free to put any questions that you have for Jesse in the Q&A box down below on your Zoom screen. Or if you like to come off of mic, feel free to also raise your hand and we will get you off of mute and you can ask your question to Jesse. While we wait, I have a question for you. So you've been working a lot in trauma-informed care and trauma and child diversity and things like that for a really long time in your professional career. And we know that burnout is very common in these fields where people and professionals are working with families and communities that are dealing with trauma. So how do you kind of navigate that when you're trying to focus on your motivation and avoiding burnout when working in this space?
What an important question. I will say that I'm yet to become perfect in that, and I think as with so many folks in this movement, struggle with burnout myself at various times. I think a few things that I have started to engage in. So one is that I have adopted a daily prayer practice where every morning I start with prayer and just that centers me from the beginning of the day. The other big thing that I really engaged in was, again, a recognition that my own well-being was important in working to promote well-being broadly and modeling the model through that. And one adjustment that I have made, I really struggled to take care of myself through diet and exercise and don't abide by a 40-hour work week with what I'm about to say, but have started to consider exercise and diet and cooking food and ensuring that I am eating more healthily as part of the work that I do as I continue, which was a paradigm shift. I was never able to really do that stuff for me personally, but when I considered it part of my professional responsibility, that was a big shift that enabled me to start to take better care of myself. Those two practices have really helped. And then leaning on friends and family and loved ones has been huge, and my coworkers and colleagues. And then the last thing that I'll say is, I think, as with so many people in this work, I'm motivated by my own survivor mission. I've experienced my own trauma and complex PTSD, and know that I have been so supported by others and feel so blessed for that, and believe that that's something that everyone should have opportunities for, right? Supports and resources that allow for them to thrive. And when I'm at, the bottom of the barrel in terms of how much fuel I got left when I'm, feeling burnout, that helps me get through to the end. And then I lean into those other practices to try to maintain well-being and energy as best as possible. It's a journey.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much for your answer. I think that really helps us. I know a lot of people here in the audience are themselves kind of trying to figure out how best to manage their burnout and find ways to de-stress whenever they're working with so much trauma in the community that they work with. So we have another question in the Q&A box. Can you share a personal experience that influenced your perspective on trauma-informed care, policy, and practice?
Yeah, the first, it's a great question. The first area that comes to mind is education, for me. So when I was in school, my best friend, my childhood best friend from the time that I was 4 passed away tragically in a plane crash between my ninth and 10th grade years. And following that experience, I really struggled to pay attention in school, right? I was struggling with much with things that felt a lot bigger than what I was learning in the classroom, and I was not treated with compassion by all of my teachers. It was really hard for me for a long time to focus and pay attention in school, because every day that I was in school, it reminded me of Doug. When you're best friends with someone from 4 until 15, you spend so much of your time with them at school. And it was really difficult to engage. And I knew how badly I was harmed by the education system, and the ways that it kind of forced this tracked approach, that didn't allow for much else to occur in life that distracted from that. And but I was very, very lucky. Baseball was a huge part of my life that led to opportunities for healing. I knew my first job, I mentioned that because my first job out of college was working at a Philadelphia public high school, and I saw how much more adversity and stress there were that many of the students that I worked with experienced. The majority of students from the school lived below the poverty line. There was one student who comes to mind in particular who had lost 3 friends to gun violence that year alone that I worked there. And I recognized how much more adversity and stress was faced with far fewer resources and supports for healing. And that was what influenced my passion, my personal experiences, and then my professional experiences to advocate for trauma-informed schools, that the most important thing needs to be taking care of our students at a human level. And as we do that, as we build capacity around trauma-informed schools, and we did work with the Department of Education, there's a trauma-informed schools toolkit that we have available on our website, and we're doing work around trying to promote trauma-informed approaches for students with learning differences as well. All of that work around education system reform has been inspired by my own experiences that I've directly experienced, as well as those that I have indirectly experienced through my professional experiences.
Wow. Thank you, Jesse, for sharing. I'm sorry for your loss, but thank you for being vulnerable with us and sharing that with us. Yeah, a lot of our lived and personal experience do affect all of what we see. I'm pretty sure a lot of adults have experienced some sort of trauma that affects them. So that's why this work is so important. Does anyone else have any questions for Jesse that you would like to put in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can take you on the mic and you can ask. Um, I don't see any right now, but Jesse, can you talk a little bit about the change campaign that you founded and or the CTIP for everyone in our audience that aren't too familiar with what both of those organizations are about? Can you talk a little bit about what they do, their mission, their vision, and things like that?
Yeah, gladly. So CTIP, I'll start with CTIP, was founded in 2015 by leaders in the trauma-informed movement for 2 main reasons. One is that there was a recognition that there was a missing federal advocacy voice around the importance of trauma-informed care, and federal dollars that were going to treat the symptoms of trauma, like we saw on that syndemic slide, were not being focused toward trauma-informed programs that were taking off around the country. The other place was that within the trauma-informed movement, there was a lot of siloing that was going on. So there was work in trauma-informed education, there was work in trauma-informed healthcare, trauma-informed justice system reform, etc. But there wasn't a comprehensive vision that existed for what a truly trauma-informed society could look like. And that's where CTIP's rooted, in trying to build that advocacy voice and trying to promote a cross-sector, community-led initiative that drives the trauma-informed movement forward. And so that's what inspires our advocacy work. We have CTIPP CAN, which is our community advocacy network that I discussed a little bit. And then our work with Press On, which is where we align a national effort that connects to statewide coalitions that then connect to community coalitions, where we are doing the TRCN work, where we're working with community coalitions and trying to create an infrastructure where we are able to learn from innovation that is coming out of communities, and then better able to synthesize those emergings and findings, mobilize folks around that, mobilize policymakers around that to then create investments into the community capacity that we know is so important. Before I get into the change campaign, and I know that was very high level, I think I saw another question come in, and I don't want to just keep rambling about the change campaign, though I am very, very happy to do so.
So yes, we have one question. They're asking, are there any recommendations for staff that wants a trauma-informed workplace but don't have the support from leadership?
It is very, very difficult. And the last thing that I want to do is indicate that folks should go into potentially traumatizing environments if there is a toxic environment that forces people into elements of traumatization or re-traumatization. With that advocacy voice and being that constant nudge that is helping to inform people of why this is so important, right? A lot of those facts and figures that exist within the toolkit that I shared earlier and many others that are well known are important. And then knowing that you don't have to do it alone, right? Like even if, assuming that it's a larger workplace, if there are other employees that may not be in leadership, but some of your peers and colleagues who also want to see trauma-informed workplaces grow within our advocacy at any level, there are strength in numbers. And so having those conversations outside of leadership, forming a coalition that can help to drive some of this change and lead that change for the organization within where you are is really important. And the last thing that I'll say very quickly is that as trauma-informed advocates, it's important for us to keep in mind as best as possible the stresses that others face. So as we are advocating to leadership, what are the stresses that they face? It's probably some bottom line figures, understanding that to help us navigate our own advocacy, to model the model as we continue to try to build trauma-informed cultures is very important. But it's a journey, and it can be really, really difficult for sure.
We have another question. What's the most challenging aspect of your work, particularly in advocating for trauma-informed policy and serving communities, and how did you overcome it?
Still working to overcome it. I think that we're getting better, but it's complex, right? Like I think that a lot of times those simple solutions that people look for instance, there is an opioid crisis going on in our country right now. So let's invest in one of the many very important and necessary direct services to curtail the opioid crisis is much more simple than explaining that adverse childhood experiences are very predictive of intravenous drug use, right? In the original ACEs study, those with 4 or more ACEs, which was 1 in 8 people in that population, were more than 1,000% more likely to partake in intravenous drug use. And so communicating that indirect sort of service to address the root cause and the importance of trauma-informed work, I am still working to get better at. I think that, some of the language and narrative, some of the emotional appeal that we have created around where community comes together and where it is through relationships that we find so much healing. And that is so much the orientation of the work that we're trying to do is improving, but there is still more work to improve around that. But that continues to be a barrier. And I continue to try to get better.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. I also want to say that as a person with a degree in public health, I so very appreciate that you talk about the root causes because that's very important when we're thinking about trauma and policy. So I just wanted to say that. We have another question asking about the toolkit. So you mentioned the toolkit several times throughout your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about its use, how communities are using it, what's the vision for it, what's been the response, and how would one go about using it if they wanted to start?
Yeah, so just want to highlight that I put, when I took my slides down, the links to the toolkits in the chat, so you can find them there if you're interested. For the workplace toolkit, it's got a lot of helpful considerations, right? For the question about how do I advocate for a trauma-informed workplace, there's going to be a lot of advocacy material and really good ideas that come up in that toolkit. I don't think it's an implementation guide, but can really inform some initial directions and conversations for where the work can go in workplaces. Same with the community toolkit, a lot of really helpful considerations that exist in there. And then the TRCN work that we're doing to build population level resilience, the impacts of climate related disasters. That work is, we have ongoing communities of practice. If you are part of a community coalition or would like to begin a community coalition that is doing work along those lines, we have toolkits that you can find on the TRCN page. There's different toolkits for different stages: perspective, which is like forming a steering committee; emerging, which is forming the mission and vision and strategic plan; and then a commissioned TRCN, which is really driving the strategic plan in the community. And then we also have technical assistance and regular meetings with other communities that are engaged in that work regularly. And so that's the most interactive and technical assistance side of the toolkit. The others can help to inform advocacy and be really useful in helping people understand the importance of trauma-informed care, the impacts of trauma, all of that. There's just a lot of material in each of those toolkits. And yeah, I don't know if that answered the question well, but, and then there's a lot of community. I mean, we make it available for free, so I don't know how every community that uses it is using it, but there's, thousands of downloads on our materials.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for your answer. I hope that helped everyone, the person who had asked that question. But I want to say that we are at time. I just wanted to remind everyone about the post survey. If you are doing the webinar for CEU credits, it's just a reminder that you have to take the post survey in order to get your CEU credits. But even if you aren't getting CEU credits, it will be really helpful for us here at the Blanco Center to also take that so we can use your data and improve our future webinars to come. I know I see there's another question that's in the chat and I mean in the Q&A box, and Liz is typing an answer to that because I'm not sure, Jesse, how tuned in you are with the school system here in Louisiana. So you might not know that answer. But I just wanted to say again, thank you everyone for attending. If you have any lingering questions, we're going to stay a minute or two to answer a couple more of your questions. But other than that, have a great rest of your day and don't forget the survey. So thank you guys, and we'll see you in January for our 2025 Lunch and Learn webinars.
When I do not know a lot about the Louisiana school system, but would love to learn more as time moves on.
Yeah, I figured Lafayette Parish School System is very specific. I honestly don't even know that answer. So if anyone here does know, feel free to type that answer in.
I'll be excited to see. And then, yeah, as we're waiting, just because I didn't get to it, the change campaign loans out my time to serve as CTIPP's executive director, so that way it's not hitting CTIPP's payroll, which was an equity concern of how I became executive director, a much longer conversation, but that's part of why that structure exists. And then I wrote a piece of policy that we're trying to pass in Philadelphia called the Love Act, Lowering Overdose and Violence Epidemics, which would create a grant program for community-led coalitions, and then intergovernmental coordination as like two key components to drive trauma-informed responses to address root cause drivers. And then we're building an agenda that we call the full press to create kind of a social, economic, political framework with which the trauma-informed movement can scale. And that's the work that I do in short in the change campaign versus CTIPP. So it's a little bit more targeted, a little bit more entrepreneurial, while CTIPP's creating containers for like the whole of the trauma-informed movement to really grow.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing there's a dozen more people here on here, so if you guys don't have any other questions, I think we are going to close out for today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. We're going to close out the webinar for today. Again, thank you, Lisa Gill, for your interpretation for today, and thank you, Jesse, for your amazing presentation.
Take care. Hope to see you all soon. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.